March 1942, Southern California. The morning sun breaks over the sprawling flatlands of Southern California, casting long shadows across what had been, only months before, vast stretches of farmland and citrus groves. The air carries the scent of orange blossoms mixed now with something else: hot metal, rubber, fresh paint. From the port of San Pedro to the edges of the Mojave Desert, the earth trembles with a rhythm that had never existed before: the synchronized thunder of riveting guns, the whine of machinery operating in 3 unbroken shifts, the drone of aircraft engines being tested for the first time. In a converted ice skating rink in Burbank, workers swarm over the skeletal frames of P-38 Lightning fighters. In Long Beach, a former field where cattle graze now houses assembly lines that stretch nearly a quarter mile. And in Santa Monica, where the Pacific breeze once carried only the laughter of beachgoers, it now carries the industrial symphony of Douglas aircraft churning out bombers at a rate that defies comprehension. Standing in the operations room of the Imperial Japanese Navy headquarters in Tokyo, Vice Admiral Inoue Shigeyoshi examines intelligence photographs that have just arrived via submarine reconnaissance. His hands, steady through 100 naval engagements, tremble slightly as he spreads the images across the table. What he sees should be impossible. The attack on Pearl Harbor had been, by every measure, a masterpiece of military planning. On that December morning, the Imperial Japanese Navy had demonstrated to the world, and particularly to the Americans, the full extent of their industrial and tactical superiority. 6 aircraft carriers had launched 353 aircraft in 2 devastating waves. 8 battleships sunk or damaged. Nearly 200 aircraft destroyed. More than 2,400 Americans dead. It had been the most successful surprise attack in naval history. A blow so severe that Japanese military planners believed it would take the United States at least 18 months to recover, if they chose to recover at all. The American industrial base, they had been told, was soft, grown complacent in peacetime, distracted by labor disputes and the inefficiencies of democracy. Their intelligence estimates, compiled by some of the most respected analysts in the imperial military, suggested that America might produce perhaps 10,000 to 12,000 aircraft annually if they mobilized fully. Japan, with its streamlined military economy already on war footing, was producing approximately 5,000 aircraft per year from facilities that had been refined and expanded throughout the 1930s. The mathematics seemed sound. The Americans had greater raw resources, certainly, but resources meant nothing without the discipline and industrial coordination that only a militarized society could achieve. But the photographs spread before Admiral Inoue tell a different story, one that seems to belong to the realm of fiction rather than intelligence analysis. The reconnaissance images show not a gradual industrial mobilization, but a transformation so rapid and total that it appears to have been accomplished by some form of alchemy. In less than 6 months since Pearl Harbor, California alone has become a manufacturing center that rivals the industrial output of entire nations. The scale is not incremental, is exponential. Lockheed's Burbank facility, which had employed 7,000 workers and occupied a modest complex of buildings in 1940, now sprawls across 300 acres and employs more than 80,000 people working around the clock. The plant is producing P-38 fighters at a rate of 1 aircraft every 20 minutes during peak production. Douglas Aircraft's Long Beach plant has grown from a workforce of 4,000 to more than 44,000 in 18 months. North American Aviation in Inglewood has expanded so rapidly that neighborhoods have been cleared, streets rerouted, and entire districts rezoned to accommodate assembly lines that seem to have no ending point. Consolidated Aircraft in San Diego occupies what had been 8 city blocks and now functions as a small city unto itself, with its own fire department, medical facilities, and internal transportation system. Admiral Inoue sets down the photographs and walks to the window overlooking Tokyo Bay. Somewhere in his mind, he can still hear the confident predictions made in the planning rooms before Pearl Harbor. America was rich but lazy. Democratic nations could not match the focused efficiency of an empire united under divine purpose. The Americans loved comfort more than sacrifice. These assumptions had not been careless. They had been based on observable evidence. The United States had been slow to rearm, reluctant to abandon its isolationist stance, plagued by strikes and political division. The Japanese military leadership had watched as America struggled through the Depression, as breadlines stretched through major cities, as unemployment ravaged communities. They had studied the American character through the lens of Hollywood movies, which showed a people obsessed with individual pleasure and material comfort. How could such a nation, they reasoned, compete with an empire that had spent decades teaching its children the virtues of sacrifice and collective purpose? What they had failed to understand, what the intelligence reports and cultural analyses had completely missed, was that the American system contained a dormant capability that no one, not even the Americans themselves, had fully comprehended. Democracy, with all its apparent inefficiencies and contradictions, had created an industrial base that was not merely large, but adaptive. The same freedom that allowed for labor disputes and political arguments had also fostered an environment where innovation happened not just in government laboratories, but in thousands of small workshops, garages, and manufacturing plants. The assembly line techniques pioneered by Henry Ford for automobile production could be retooled for aircraft manufacturing. The engineering talent spread across dozens of universities and technical schools could be rapidly mobilized. The management expertise developed in peacetime industries, film studios, oil refineries, construction companies, could be redirected toward military production. And perhaps most critically, the American economy possessed something that no amount of military discipline could replicate: depth. In Japan, skilled aircraft workers were a carefully cultivated resource, trained over years in specialized facilities. In California, skilled aircraft workers were being created by the tens of thousands through crash training programs that turned housewives, farmers, and department store clerks into precision riveters and hydraulic specialists in a matter of weeks. Lockheed established training centers that could process 500 new workers every 10 days. Douglas Aircraft created educational facilities that operated like universities, with classrooms, technical labs, and graduated certification programs. North American Aviation recruited women who had never held a job outside the home, and within 6 weeks, had them installing complex electrical systems in P-51 Mustang fighters. The traditional barriers that limited industrial expansion, finding skilled labor, building specialized tools, establishing supply chains, were being overcome not through military efficiency, but through capitalist pragmatism. If skilled workers were needed, they would be trained. If specialized tools were required, they would be invented. If raw materials were in short supply, substitutes would be developed or new sources found. By the summer of 1942, the intelligence reports reaching Tokyo have become increasingly difficult to credit. California is not just producing aircraft, it is producing them at scales that seem to violate the fundamental principles of industrial organization. In July alone, American factories deliver more than 5,000 aircraft, with California accounting for nearly half that total. The production rate is not merely matching Japanese output, it is exceeding it by factors that military analysts struggle to explain to their superiors. A single factory complex in Long Beach is producing more bombers per month than the entire Japanese aircraft industry. The Douglas SBD Dauntless, a dive bomber that will prove instrumental in the Pacific Campaign, is being manufactured at a rate that would require Japan to dedicate virtually its entire aviation industry to match. And these are not crude expedient weapons being rushed from assembly lines. They are sophisticated combat aircraft incorporating advanced hydraulic systems, complex engines, and cutting-edge radio equipment. Colonel Yamamoto Takashi, an aviation specialist attached to the Army General Staff, is assigned to analyze the American production figures and produce an explanatory report. He spends weeks reviewing the intelligence data, cross-referencing it with pre-war assessments, searching for errors in methodology or interpretation. The numbers refuse to change. He interviews pilots returning from combat operations in the Pacific, asking them about the condition and sophistication of American aircraft they have encountered. They report that the aircraft are well built, sometimes superior to Japanese equivalents in specific performance categories. He examines captured American equipment, looking for signs of corner cutting or quality degradation that might explain the high production rates. He finds none. Finally, he sits down to write his report, and for the first time in his military career, he finds himself unable to translate observations into confident conclusions. The Americans, he writes, appear to have achieved something that Japanese military theory had considered impossible. They have created an industrial system that becomes more efficient as it expands, rather than less. Each new factory built in California seems to function not as an isolated production unit, but as part of an interconnected system where innovations in one plant are rapidly disseminated to others, where bottlenecks in one supply chain are addressed by entrepreneurs creating entirely new supply sources, where the competitive instincts of capitalism have been harnessed to military purpose without eliminating the adaptability that competition generates. The symbolic measure of this transformation becomes a single object repeated millions of times across California's aircraft plants, the rivet. In traditional aircraft construction, riveting was a skilled trade requiring years of training. A master riveter could place perhaps 400 rivets in a shift, each one requiring precise positioning, exact pressure, and careful inspection. The Japanese aircraft industry, recognizing this limitation, had designed their combat aircraft to require fewer rivets, using larger skin panels and accepting some reduction in structural strength as an acceptable trade-off. American engineers, confronted with the need to produce aircraft in unprecedented numbers, approached the problem differently. If riveting was a bottleneck, then riveting itself would be transformed. Pneumatic rivet guns were refined and standardized. Training programs were developed that could teach basic riveting in days rather than years. Workstations were redesigned so that multiple riveters could work on the same fuselage section simultaneously. The rivet itself was redesigned, made easier to handle, more forgiving of minor installation errors, available in fewer variants to simplify inventory. By mid-1942, a single B-24 Liberator bomber, which required more than 360,000 rivets, could be assembled in a production time that would have seemed impossible 2 years earlier. But it was not merely the mechanics of riveting that had changed, it was who was doing the riveting. In a Douglas aircraft plant in Long Beach, a former elementary school teacher named Margaret Kerr discovers that she has an aptitude for precision work. She completes the basic training course and is assigned to a team installing rivets in the wing sections of SBD Dauntless dive bombers. Within 2 months, her speed and accuracy ratings place her in the top 10% of the facility's 44,000 workers. She is promoted to team leader, then to section supervisor. By the end of 1942, she is overseeing quality control for an entire production line, managing a team that includes former accountants, farmhands, musicians, and bank tellers. None of them had any experience in aircraft manufacturing 18 months earlier. All of them are now producing combat aircraft that will, in a few weeks, be flying missions over the Pacific. At a Lockheed plant in Burbank, the swing shift is entirely staffed by women, many of them wives or mothers of men serving overseas. They arrive at 4 p.m. and work until midnight, fabricating P-38 Lightning fighters under industrial lights that turn the factory floor into a surreal landscape of shadows and sparks. Some of them wear jeweled pins shaped like tiny aircraft, one pin for every plane completed by their section. By the war's end, some of these women will wear pins numbering in the thousands. The Japanese commanders studying intelligence reports from California fixate on certain details that seem to encapsulate the strangeness of American industrial power. At the Consolidated Aircraft Plant in San Diego, the facility includes a full-service cafeteria that can feed 10,000 workers per shift, serving meals that include meat, fresh vegetables, and desserts. At North American Aviation, the company has built on-site medical clinics staffed with doctors and nurses, ensuring that minor injuries or illnesses do not result in lost production time. Douglas Aircraft provides free bus transportation for workers from across the Los Angeles basin, operating a fleet that rivals the city's public transportation system. These amenities, which seem frivolous from a perspective of Japanese military-industrial culture, are not distractions from production but enablers of it. Well-fed workers are more productive. Healthy workers have fewer absences. Workers who can commute reliably show up for their shifts. The American approach to industrial mobilization includes a recognition that seems almost paradoxical to the Japanese planners. Treating workers well increases output. By the autumn of 1942, the strategic implications of California's aircraft production have become impossible to ignore. Japanese military planners had designed their Pacific campaign around the assumption of rough industrial parity degrading slowly in America's favor over a period of years. They had calculated that Japan's existing naval and air superiority, combined with shorter supply lines and interior defensive positions, would allow them to establish a defensive perimeter that could be held indefinitely or negotiated from a position of strength. These calculations assumed that American industrial production would ramp up gradually, constrained by the normal limitations of factory construction, worker training, and supply chain development. Instead, within 9 months of Pearl Harbor, American production has already reached levels that were not anticipated until 1944. The psychological impact of these realizations ripples through the Japanese command structure in ways that are difficult to quantify but impossible to ignore. Lieutenant Commander Fukuda Mitsuo, who led the first wave of aircraft in the Pearl Harbor attack, is shown reconnaissance photographs of California's aircraft plants during a strategic briefing in late 1942. He studies them in silence, his expression unreadable. When asked for his assessment, he speaks carefully, choosing words that will not sound defeatist but cannot avoid the truth. The Americans, he says, have revealed a capability that was hidden during peacetime. The democratic system, which appeared chaotic and inefficient, was actually building something that military discipline alone could not create, an economy that could transform itself completely in a matter of months. The very features that Japanese planners had identified as American weaknesses, individualism, capitalism, the messy arguments of democracy, had turned out to be sources of strength. Individual initiative meant that thousands of small innovations were happening simultaneously across California's aircraft industry. Capitalist competition meant that companies were driving each other toward greater efficiency. Democratic debate meant that problems were identified and addressed through open argument rather than hidden to preserve hierarchy. The transformation of California is not merely industrial, but also geographic and social. In 1940, Los Angeles was the fifth largest city in America, a sprawling coastal metropolis known primarily for its film industry and pleasant weather. By 1943, it has become the second largest manufacturing center in the nation, surpassed only by Detroit. The population has exploded, growing by more than 800,000 people as workers flood in from across the country seeking high-paying defense jobs. Housing construction cannot keep pace, leading to the creation of temporary communities, trailer parks, converted barracks, shared apartments where workers sleep in rotating shifts. The social fabric of the region transforms as women take factory jobs in unprecedented numbers, as African Americans migrate from the South seeking opportunities denied them at home, as the rigid social hierarchies of the Depression era dissolve in the urgency of wartime production. A black woman from Louisiana can find herself working alongside a white farmer's daughter from Oklahoma, both of them earning wages that would have been unimaginable 3 years earlier, both of them contributing to an industrial output that is reshaping the strategic balance of the Pacific War. At the Vega aircraft plant in Burbank, the swing shift supervisor posts production numbers every morning, not just for his own plant, but for competing facilities across California. The numbers are updated daily, creating an unofficial competition between plants. Which facility can achieve the highest quality rating? Which can reduce production time most dramatically? Which can go the longest without a major accident? This competitive spirit, so antithetical to Japanese concepts of collective harmony and unified purpose, drives continuous improvement across the entire aircraft industry. Engineers at Lockheed develop a new technique for forming aluminum wing sections that reduces production time by 40 minutes per aircraft. Within 2 weeks, engineers at Douglas have adopted the technique and modified it, achieving an additional 15-minute reduction. North American Aviation's engineers observe both innovations, integrate them into their P-51 production line, and add their own refinements. The cycle of innovation and adoption happens not over years, but over weeks, driven not by central planning, but by the decentralized competition that is capitalism's signature characteristic. Japanese intelligence analysts, attempting to understand this phenomenon, focus increasingly on the role of California's unique industrial ecology. The state is not simply large or wealthy, it is diverse in ways that create unexpected synergies. The film industry's expertise in large-scale project management translates directly to aircraft factory administration. The oil industry's engineering talent provides solutions for hydraulic systems and fuel management. The agricultural sector's experience with seasonal labor management helps aircraft companies handle the massive influx of new workers. Even California's climate plays a role. The mild weather allows for year-round construction and outdoor assembly operations that would be impossible in northern climates, accelerating factory expansion and reducing heating costs. This convergence of favorable factors, industrial diversity, available land, good climate, skilled labor from multiple sectors, access to ports, and existing infrastructure creates a manufacturing environment that is genuinely unique. And the Americans, through a combination of planning and pragmatic adaptation, have exploited these advantages with ruthless efficiency. By the spring of 1943, the strategic situation in the Pacific has shifted fundamentally, driven in large measure by the output of California's aircraft factories. At the Battle of Midway, American carriers had achieved a stunning victory despite being outnumbered, sinking 4 Japanese carriers while losing only one of their own. But Midway was a battle won primarily through intelligence and tactical skill, fought with aircraft that had been produced before the industrial mobilization was fully underway. The battles now being fought in the Solomon Islands and New Guinea are different. They are attritional struggles where the side that can replace losses more quickly holds the decisive advantage. And in this kind of warfare, California's production capacity is proving determinative. A Japanese Zero fighter shot down over Guadalcanal might be replaced in 3 months if replacement production can be diverted from other theaters and the aircraft can be transported across long supply lines. An American F-6F Hellcat shot down in the same engagement will be replaced in 2 weeks, the new aircraft rolling off a production line in California, being loaded onto a transport ship in San Diego, and arriving at the forward base as part of a steady stream of replacements that seems to have no limit. Japanese pilots, who in 1942 had been the most experienced and capable in the world, are being worn down through attrition that cannot be reversed. Each loss represents hundreds of hours of training that cannot be easily replaced. American pilots, by contrast, are backed by a training system that has expanded as dramatically as the aircraft production facilities. New training bases across Texas, Arizona, and Nevada are graduating thousands of pilots monthly, each one trained on aircraft that are functionally identical to those being produced for combat, because American industrial standardization ensures that training aircraft and combat aircraft share the same characteristics. The rivet, that small symbolic object repeated hundreds of thousands of times in each aircraft, comes to represent something larger in the minds of Japanese commanders attempting to understand their deteriorating strategic position. Is not that individual Japanese aircraft are inferior. Indeed, in many specific performance categories, Japanese designs retain advantages: lighter weight, greater maneuverability, longer range. But those advantages are being overwhelmed by sheer abundance. For every Japanese aircraft that can be produced, California's factories are producing 10 American aircraft. The factories in Essen continued their careful work, each gun a masterpiece, each piece representing hundreds of hours of specialized labor. But the furnaces were going cold now, one by one, as Allied bombers returned with the same industrial persistence that characterized American artillery, not seeking perfection but simply returning, night after night, until the accumulated damage exceeded any possibility of repair. The Krupp Works, which had survived every previous war intact, began to resemble a lunar landscape itself, craters and rubble where the great forges had stood. Production shifted to underground facilities, to dispersed workshops hidden in forests, to a desperate improvisation that could not replace what had been lost. By 1944, German heavy gun production had fallen to fewer than 100 pieces per month. By early 1945, it had effectively ceased. The American factories, meanwhile, had reached a kind of terrible maturity, their production systems refined to the point where artillery manufacture had become almost autonomic. The arsenal of democracy was producing 8,000 artillery pieces per month by late 1944, a figure that would have seemed like a typographical error to pre-war planners. These were not just guns for American forces, but for British, Canadian, French, Polish, Brazilian, and eventually Soviet armies, an ocean of material that flowed wherever it was needed with the casual abundance of water from an open hydrant. The long columns of American trucks carrying artillery forward had become a universal symbol of Allied advance, as characteristic of the Western Front as the Tiger tank was of German defense. But where the Tiger appeared in propaganda photographs because each one was precious and notable, the American guns appeared because they were everywhere, as common as rainfall. The symbolic weight of this disparity extended far beyond military effectiveness. German soldiers, raised in a culture that venerated craftsmanship and quality, that took pride in producing fewer but superior products, faced a cognitive dissonance that no amount of propaganda could fully bridge. The Nazi ideology had promised them superiority through will and racial destiny. The reality they encountered was superiority through manufacturing capacity and industrial organization, a profoundly unromantic, distinctly democratic form of power that made individual excellence irrelevant. A single German gun crew might indeed be more skilled, better trained, more dedicated than their American counterparts. But what did skill matter when 10 American guns responded to every German shot? What did training achieve when American replacement crews arrived fresh from depots, while German crews fought until they were destroyed? The American soldiers, for their part, absorbed a different lesson. They learned that democracy, whatever its flaws and compromises, could mobilize industrial capacity in ways that authoritarian efficiency could not match. The endless artillery was not just military support, It was a promise that the vast productive resources of an entire continent stood behind them, that they were not expected to fight with inadequate tools or make do with shortages. When they called for fire support, it arrived not as a carefully rationed gift from above, but as a right, an expectation that reflected the fundamental American belief that problems could be solved through material abundance and industrial organization. The artillery became a physical manifestation of a different kind of society, one that mass-produced not just guns but the very concept of overwhelming force made possible through voluntary cooperation rather than coerced efficiency. By the winter of 1945, the comparison had become almost obscene. German artillery units were fighting with whatever pieces they could salvage, repair, or capture. American artillery parks in France resembled industrial warehouses, thousands of guns arranged in geometric rows, more firepower sitting idle awaiting deployment than the entire German army possessed. The final offensive into Germany became an exercise in material demonstration, not because American commanders were particularly brilliant or German defenders particularly inept, but because the arithmetic had become so lopsided that skill and courage became rounding errors in equations dominated by supply tonnage and replacement rates. The last German heavy gun rolled out of a makeshift workshop in Bavaria in March 1945, assembled from scavenged parts by elderly workers who remembered building naval artillery for the Kaiser. It was never fired in combat. The crew assigned to man it surrendered to American forces 6 days later, the gun still in its transport position, a museum piece before it had ever become a weapon. The American artillery that accepted their surrender had been manufactured 4 months earlier in Pennsylvania, one of 847 identical pieces produced that month, shipped across the Atlantic in convoys so large they stretched over horizons, and distributed to units with the casual efficiency of mail delivery. The German gun bore a brass plate inscribed with the names of the craftsmen who had built it, a final gesture toward the old traditions. The American gun bore serial numbers stamped by machine, unreadable under the coating of mud and cosmoline, anonymous and perfectly interchangeable with thousands of others. In the end, the 5,000 German heavy guns, each a masterwork, each representing the pinnacle of traditional armament engineering, were buried beneath the sheer accumulated weight of 250,000 American artillery pieces. Not defeated in any simple tactical sense, but rendered irrelevant by an industrial capacity that had learned to treat war as a problem of production rather than perfection, of volume rather than virtue. The German engineers had forged weapons worthy of Vulcan's own forge, and America had responded by building factories that made Vulcan himself obsolete.